Okay, so there's two ways of running Ruby. One is like you write the program, like you spend a week writing the program and then you say go. And the other way is the interactive Ruby, where it's like as soon as you write a line of code, it runs it.
And where do you write the other one?
In a file.
Just in a text file?
Yep. So you create a text file with the .rb on the end, and then you say Ruby run this file. We'll maybe do that in a minute. Actually, I'll write that down. Okay. So yeah, those are the main differences, and whether you use one depends on the situation. Because anything you put into IRB, it forgets forever. So obviously if you're writing an actual program, you don't want to put it in there because it forgets it. It's usually more if you're doing some kind of like testing thing, you're just trying out an idea. And then once you've got it working in IRB, you'll write the proper thing. Oh yeah, I can't see this, so if it's like too bright or too dark, just yell and let me know. Okay, so as you saw from Codecademy, Ruby, it's kind of like maths, but not maths. So 1 plus 1 makes sense, it's basic maths, but something like hello, alright, no, okay, so name equals Steve, and then I do, oops, hello. Yeah, so if you guys type along what I type, so I've just created a variable and put in Steve. I can kind of do maths with that stuff, but it's not really like maths. So in this case, I'm adding like one piece of text to another piece of text. And the point is, it's that kind of like, it's taking that same like logic of maths, but using it to do something useful. And I think that's pretty much it. It's like a recipe, but really like super logical. Like take this thing and connect it with this thing, and then take the result of that thing, connect it with that thing. But the things can be quite elaborate, like take the Twitter client, search for the word hat, take the result of that, get the first tweet result, take that tweet, put it through a translator, take the result of that that's now in French, and print it out in HTML and make it blue. So it's like step. And generally what you want is for each step to be quite simple. So it's kind of like, how do I break down this big elaborate problem I want to do? Like, I don't know, I want to build Facebook. How do I turn Facebook into a series of like individual steps, like a recipe? And it's kind of this kind of structure of like thing equals thing, connect thing to thing. Okay, and it follows, every language has a different syntax. Because you as a human, so for example, like you as a human, that looks like it makes sense. Because you see, like I have a piece of text that says hello Dave. Oh, actually that's a bad, I don't know, put it this way. So as a human, we interpret like reading quite flexibly. Like see the way I've got a double quote and then a single quote. If you wrote that in a letter or an email to someone, they'd be fine with it. If I do it programming, it gets a bit confused because it's going, where is my ending thing? I'd say that's a bad example. Well, actually let's do this, like name. If I try and add a name to a number, like as a human, you could figure that out and it would be Steve1, whereas this just goes like, no, you must follow my rules. Where's I going with that? Yeah, so basically there's a syntax, you have to follow it, because that's how it knows what you want. And the trade-off is that it means it's very, very precise. It will never be unsure what you mean. So for example, with that, actually, yeah, so see the hello div one, where I've opened the piece of text but then closed it with the wrong one. In human terms, that's now kind of ambiguous of like, did I want to close it, or did I genuinely want that single quote in the piece of text? Like, you know the way sometimes, like in English, if you have like the word it too much, like where is the bottle compared to the table? It is on it. It starts to get confusing which one you're referring to. So the strong syntax means it's always like super clear. Just a note on that, somewhere in the links, helpful links, where did it go? No, is it there? Yep. There is, conveniently by a guy in Berlin, wrote this. There is a big page, it's in week 1, day 1 exercises of all the syntax. So if you ever forget it, this is quite good to just like look through. But again, you can just look at previous examples of how you did it. Okay, and yeah, there's a link. Okay, and variables. So I think kind of the two core things are variables and functions. And variables are where you store stuff. And it's like the same as maths. Well, is it? It's similar to maths, the way you did it, where you have something on the right, which is like, what's a word for that? Like the thing that is happening, and then on the left is like the place where you pick the result. So in this case, 1 plus 1 is like, what do I want to happen? And then x is where do I want to store it? But you can get quite crazy like that. Like, I don't know. So this isn't really going to work, but it's, this one, don't type this one. I'm going to go crazy. Twitter.search. So this isn't real code. But I could do something crazy like this. Like, get me Barack Obama's first tweet, translate it, but then put the result into this variable. So it's not going to work because I don't really have Twitter connected. But that's basically what variable, you can put anything in there.
If you would have Twitter connected, it would work.
Yep. Do I have the example somewhere? Oh yeah. Where's the one? So this is finding some guy called Steve. Actually, okay, wait, so I can do result equals, oh, no wait, bad idea. Okay. So I do result equals Twitter client, get me the user called Steve, and get me first tweet and the text of the first tweet. But now I can do result, and I can do that 1,000 times. Now I've got that. And actually, so an important part with variables that a lot of people get confused on is once you've got it in a variable, you can totally forget where it came from. This is a piece of text, and it doesn't matter that it came from Twitter or from user typing or that you just generated yourself. And that's kind of an important part of like the recipe breakdown of like, you want to do something very complex, but trying to fit it all in your head at once is very difficult. Whereas now that I know I've got this result, I can do the next step without having to worry about Twitter. Like if I wanted to translate it, will that work? if I want to translate this result, so this last line is the Bing translator. I know result is a piece of text, and the translator just wants a piece of text. So I don't really have to worry about like, how do I connect the translator to Twitter? And like, how should those two, like, is the Twitter thing compatible with the translator? I don't have to worry, because I know Twitter will give me a piece of text, and the translator wants a piece of text. So I've got like this middle step that's just a piece of text that's like a simple, reliable chunk. And then I give that to the translator. And now I don't have to worry about like, the translator doesn't have to worry about Twitter. I've broken each step into like separate steps, if that makes sense.
But that's something unexpected, like that. I would pass on something for some reason that affects.
Sort of. Well, that's kind of. Well, actually, that's actually a specific. Oh wait, why is that not working? That's a specific Ruby philosophy of. What is it? Basically, avoid surprises. So, for example, say you've got a function that says get first tweet. You would expect back a tweet. If it got you back a picture, that would be quite surprising. But that makes it hard to use. If you have something called get first picture and it returns some text, that's also surprising. So you want to write everything to be not surprising. So if I ask Twitter for the text of the first tweet, I mean, I know it because I've done it before, but I trust that they're not going to randomly change it one day to an image, because it would be surprising. And they, in turn, they also know, okay, we have like 10,000 people using our thing, and they're expecting text. We're not going to change it to image without kind of telling them. Sometimes stuff will change, and sometimes unexpected stuff does happen, but it's usually a bad thing. And actually, that's also quite a deliberate thing, because when you're writing the recipe, you're doing something really complicated, and it's really hard to fit that in your head. So when you're doing it, you kind of want that no surprises thing for yourself as well. Can I find a code example? Okay, can't find any examples off the top of my head. But you kind of want to write each of your components that you can forget how it works. So say you're doing Facebook thing and you spend like a week making the like news timeline work. You kind of want to make it simple enough that you don't have to understand it. Is that making sense? Okay, so I'll just do a quick example. Okay, no, actually, I'll come back to this later, because it's a bit of a big topic. Okay, but so the idea is a variable is somewhere where you put something that you can reuse later. That once it's in it, you don't have to worry about where it came from. And that will come up in a few different ways. But it means once I have a variable, chunk, it's there. One thing about variables is every variable has a type. So where did I go? Results.
One question I didn't get was that you showed earlier. Can you, or maybe you put it on classroom?
So there's in the, where did it go?
No, right.
Yeah, in the
That
Google.
was for checking, it's there.
Yeah, so in Google Drive,
Okay.
and it's this pragtobe.
Okay.
Okay. Oh yeah, also feel free to interrupt with questions at any time. Questions are good. Actually, yes, deliberately questions. And if there's anything we want to go like, oh, why is that? We can kind of take detours. Yeah, so all these lectures are going to be like, there's a plan, but the exact details are quite improvised. So if you are like, oh, this class thing is really interesting, can we talk about it for a few more minutes? That's also totally okay. So interruptions are good. Okay. Alright, so back to following the typing. So if you should still have that variable result. No, do you? No, you don't. What did we have? Okay, let's start again. Let's do name equal Steve, or whatever. So we
Is
now
it space sensitive?
sometimes kind of have to learn it the hard way, which is a bit irritating. Like sometimes it is. So for example, name equals Steve, I don't need the spaces. Obviously, if I do, oops, this, it is.
Is it usually space or usually not space? We just get used to one.
I think if you see something without spaces, keep it without spaces. So for example, result.class, I have to have no spaces because it's like it's one word, if that makes sense. Not like word, but you get the idea. Whereas like name equals Steve is like word, symbol, word, and then it's okay. So I think for the most part, if it isn't connected,
I think I'm mostly wondering about if it's something and then symbol and then something. Because the other one kind of.
I think there's not really any rule, to be honest, which is a bit odd. Like there's a space here, there's a space there, but weirdly, if you put a space here, I think it'll explode. But I don't really know why. I mean, I think because like this bracket is almost part of this word, that you couldn't have the word translate without it. But there's no particularly coherent, yeah, which is a bit of a bummer. But I think you mostly, well, the other thing is basically try it and see what happens. Like if I put a space here, it goes, oh, okay, 2 points. One, if you do it wrong, it'll explode. And the other, sometimes you'll be surprised. I was expecting that to explode. And like this, I've been doing Ruby for like 4 years now, and that's new to me. So
I'm wondering, because HTML, it seemed like there wasn't a space, but then when we went over to the Ruby tutorials, it looked like there was always a space.
Ruby, well, yeah,
The equal sign.
it varies enormously by language actually. So Ruby is quite strict with some exceptions. HTML is like super liberal, just because of how they decided to do it. Java is super strict, but PHP is not so much. It's mostly down to the person that wrote the language. So yeah, in a kind of rubbish way, it's kind of just see what other people do. I mean, you can see it from the examples. So you don't need the spaces, but quite often it makes it more readable. Like if I take all the spaces out from this, it makes it harder to see the individual pieces. It's still the same thing, but it's a bit more like, whereas if it's the version with spaces above is a little clearer. So yes, unfortunately no rules, it's kind of just see what other people do. Okay, so we have a variable called name. But yes, also a very good question. So we want to ask it, what are you? You can do variable.class. And it will tell me I am a string. And string is the programming word for a piece of text. I don't know, like string, it's a string of letters. And if you try that again with one.class, it'll tell you I'm a fixed num. I don't really know what the fix means, but it's a number. Can I think of another one? Let's just make an array for a second as well. And do the same thing, and it will tell you I'm an array. So every...
So the method is .class, but you would still often when we call it the type, right?
Yes. Class and type are pretty much the same thing. It's just one of those historical, the word class got used more often, so it won. But yes, class and type, same thing. Okay, so every object, so the word object gets thrown around a lot, and it's a bit of a fuzzy word. Basically it just means thing, like every variable is an object. I can't really think of a good wording for that. Okay, but basically every object has a class. And that's like, what are you? And every object also has like things that you can do with it that are appropriate to that class. So for example, if you type name.uppercase, it will take the word Steve and make it uppercase. But if you make an array and try and do uppercase, it's just going to go, I don't know what you're talking about. And the same way you can do a number dot odd, and it will say, are you even or odd? But if you try and do name dot odd, it goes, well, I'm a string, I can't, this doesn't make any sense to me. And so that's quite often when you have an error and something goes wrong, that's a good time to look at like what class am I actually working with? Because say somewhere along the line I've accidentally typed, I've accidentally typed name2 equals 1 instead of like string, but not realized. And then I try and do name2 dot uppercase. I go, oh, it breaks. And I go, oh, why is it broken? This makes no sense. It's a name. I should be able to uppercase it. But then when you look at the class, you go, okay, I've accidentally made it a number. It's not the thing that I thought it was. And sometimes, because quite often that happens with arrays, like you have, if I try and do, name3 equals, so if you make an array and put it in name3, actually no, call it a list. So I have a list. Because if I do list dot first dot odd, it works because it's getting an item from the array, which is a number, which we can ask, are you odd? But if I just do list dot odd, it goes, I'm an array, I don't know what that means. And that's
First is just like instead of writing notation.
Yep, that's first and last. And to be honest, this is probably the most common bug you'll come across. That you try and do something to a thing, but it's not the thing that you thought it was. Like you have an array and you want to do something to an item in the array, but not to the array. It's really hard to word that. Okay, but does that make sense? Definitely remember that one, because I think for beginners that's like one of the most common. Because you'll do something like Twitter search, and then you do like Twitter search dot uppercase instead of dot search dot first dot uppercase, because you, instead of taking the results, you're getting the first one. All right.
So do you always have to type first, second, third, or is there numbers instead?
So if you have a list, you can do by number. Actually, I'll come back to that in a second.
Starts at 0.
Yes. Confusingly, arrays start at 0. That's a really, or it's a historical thing that is now stuck so much that we can't get rid of it.
Because it had list dot second dot odd and it didn't.
It doesn't in normal Ruby. I think Ruby on Rails adds it. I'm not so sure. But generally anything after first, I do the number anyway. Because you don't want to type like dot 16th.
Right.
It just gets confusing. Yes. So that's starting at 0. That will forever be irritating and screw things up even for the next 20 years. The reason why it's 0 is it's like, if you have 10 items as a human, you're like item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whereas this is more like, from the beginning, how many slots over should I go? So if you've already got the first one, how many slots should I go? None, because I'm already at the start. Does that make sense? It's a throwback from the days when you were working with like real like memory. It was like which physical slot of RAM on the computer do I want to go for?
It's funny that no one changes it because they just could
Well, the problem is
make
if
it more like a like in a framework, you could just make that function to start in one.
some people have tried, but the problem is then it gets confusing because if you're working in the old language, it's 0, and then the new language, it's 1. But then
Try to reuse the code and then
Yeah.
It works.
everything changes.
yeah, and that's so there are a few languages that have tried it, and then everyone got really annoyed because they got confused. So everyone hates it, but they just live with it. It's unfortunate. Sometimes that happens with programming. We're kind of stuck with things. Let's talk about arrays for a second. Okay, so you can also do list.last, which is quite handy, because if you have to do the like square bracket, then you need to find out, like, if I have 20 things, I know I need to look for 20. Oh, one minor, so back to that objects thing. Anytime you have a thing, like I have a list, I can do the word dot methods, and it will tell me what can I do with this thing. And it will give you a huge list, 90% you will never use. In fact, usually if you don't see anything interesting in the first 3 lines, it's not going to be there. Because like, I don't know, instance eval, it's like really crazy internal stuff. But, so most of this won't make any sense, and never will, but this stuff like length, push and pop and shift are for like moving items around. I can sort it, I can select, so it's totally not, you're never gonna remember all this. It's more like, it's usually more if you get something weird, like, you've got back a tweet from Twitter. Do I still have that? Oops. So sometimes you get something weird. I've just got back a tweet from Twitter, but I don't know. So I can't do result.upcase anymore. So you guys don't need to type this. I can't do result.upcase anymore because it's not a string, it's a tweet. But I don't know what a tweet is. So sometimes it's helpful to be able to like look at it and say like, okay, Mr. Result, what do you actually have? And then I can kind of like, you generally don't want to have to do this because it's like, it's really hard to read, but I can kind of look in this thing and go, okay, a tweet has text and it has favorite count and it has a place. So let's maybe try place. Okay, there's no place. So usually you don't want to use this so often. It's when you're like in some kind of weirdo territory of like, I have something but I don't know what it is or how to use it. It's kind of the Sherlock Holmes let's poke it type method. Okay, and variables. Okay, one exceedingly common and really confusing error. So I have name equals Steve. Okay, so you guys type this one as well. So I do name equals Steve.
So we're overriding the variable.
Yes, good point. So variables, if you do x equals 1 and then x equals 2, the previous thing is gone. It's like it never happened. so you can reuse it as many times as you like, and it overwrites it.
And so if you're in a complex document, then it goes from top to bottom, so it can use it until it's rewritten, and then it will
Yep.
use a new one.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's in order. It gets a little more complex later because it kind of becomes, it's like you jump from here to here to here to here to here, but it's still a straight line somehow.
Okay.
We'll come back to it. Okay, so we have name equals Steve. Okay, so this is taking the word name and we're giving it the string of text Steve. Trick question, what is this line of code going to do?
It's gonna look for another variable called Steve.
Yes. And in the beginning, this is one of the most common and confusing errors. So this first one is, yeah, it's like telling it I want the string value. Whereas if I forget to do the speech marks, it's going to go and look for another variable. If I do x equals 1, and then y equals x. Oh yeah, I guess that wasn't obvious. You can set one variable equal to another. But so if I don't have the string around it, the speech marks, it looks for a variable name called Steve. I mention that because it'll happen in the beginning quite a lot. Well, as you know, it happens forever just because you sometimes forget to type it. It always does tell you what the problem was. It's just sometimes it tells you in a not so coherent way. I mean, this kind of does. This is telling you like, okay, undefined local variable Steve. Ignore the main object bit. So sometimes the error you kind of have to go like, what? Or even just how to fit it into the context will take a bit of effort, but it will tell you. Yeah, so actually this assigning variables thing. So yeah, let's do this. So x equals 1, y equals x. And then if I overwrite x equals 2, y is still the same value. Because remember what I mentioned earlier about when you set a variable, you can forget where it came from. Because y, if I do class, it's like the value of y is now 1, and we know it's the object fixed num, and I don't care where it came from anymore, which means I can change the original.
Because you declared the value to be x, which was 1 at that point, and now it's still 1.
Yeah, exactly. At that point, because it's kind of like, it's almost like it's not setting it to x. It's more like it's asking x, what are you? And then like, okay, I'm going to be that same value, as opposed to saying like, I am going to be x. There are different branches of programming where that can happen, where you say like, I don't want to be your value, I want to pretend I am you. So x. So y is not really y, it's always going to be pretending to be x no matter what happens, but that's not the standard Ruby way. It's neat for some stuff, but it's very confusing. So the Ruby way is very like, it copies the value. Which means you can now change x, you can destroy x, you can change y and it won't affect x. You can duplicate x 1,000 times into other variables and they never interfere. And that's, yeah, definitely important and something to fiddle with. Occasionally it will come up that like, yeah, you set x equal to 1 and then y equal to x, and then you're trying to, you accidentally, right, you end up fiddling with the wrong one. Sometimes that will cause errors that like, instead of trying to change y, you change x, and then you're like, oh, how come y isn't changing? I've changed it up here. So it's just something to be aware of to make sure you're changing the correct one. Okay, so that one's important. Should we take a break? Okay, we'll do like another 10-ish minutes and then take a break. Okay, so probably one of the next important ones is being able to choose what to do based on a situation, so having ifs. So like if, okay, so make sure x is equal to 1. Then I can do if x less than 10, puts ooh, and it goes ooh. So that's one of the next most important ones, being able to do ifs. Is it? So quite often that will be where your program flows, that like, do this, then that, and then if the result was this, do this, otherwise do that. And that's kind of like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So again, it's like,
So there in the terminal, like this question mark, it signals that it's still kind of ongoing?
yes.
Because for me it said 1, 0, 1, 1.
Yeah, so actually one reason to not do stuff in IRB sometimes is when you're doing a multi-line thing, it gets quite hard to read. Like especially, because like if I go up through the x less than 10, if I forget the end, so if I want to do like if this blah blah blah, but then another, like even after you've done the if, do step 2 and 3, but I forget the end, it's step 2, because I've forgotten the end, it still thinks I'm in the if. So in IRB, it's not so great with multi-line stuff. It's generally better to put it in a file. But I think if you have you guys all seen the if on Codecademy? I think I can probably skip that then. Minor things is there's also an unless, which is neat. People don't use it so often, so just instead of if x less than 10, you can do unless, and it's the same thing. Sometimes that makes the code a bit easier to read, because if you're doing like, if it's not Tuesday, then do something, sounds kind of weird, whereas unless it's Tuesday, do this. What you don't want to do is unless it's not Tuesday, because then it's like double confusing. So basically pick whichever one is most readable. They're both identical. Minor thing for the if, the syntax is like if something end. So there's no, like, you don't have to do like do or anything. Oh, actually I'm going to type it in a file. You can do if something else. I don't know. So you guys don't need to type this. I'll just ramble. Blah. So you can do if something is true and then an else. That is quite handy. But you can also go really crazy and do if, I don't know, if day equals Monday, else if day equals. So you can do this else if thing. So if this, do that. Else if something else, do that. Else. And then a final, like, if none of the ifs work, do the else. So you can get pretty complicated.
Yeah, it's if you can have as many as you want, right?
Yep.
Is
One.
there also like something like case or something?
Yes. I wonder if this guy does it. If you have a really long, is my internet working? If you have a really long list of like ifs, oh yeah, here we go. Switch. If you have a long list of like comparisons, so this guy's going to read in a word or a letter, and you can do case when. So instead of doing like if letter equals blah, else if letter equals B, else if letter equals C, else if letter equals D, case is like, I have one thing to check and compare to this big long list. So it's like when grade is A, do this, when grade is B, do that, when grade is C, do that. It's good to know it exists. Doesn't come up so often, so like you don't need to memorize it immediately, but just to know that like it's out there. And it's the same as the else if thing, it's just a bit easier to read. Or if you have a huge list, it's easier to read. And again, just Google it. Like this is the kind of one that I can't do off the top of my head because I only use it once every 6 months. So I will always just look it up or find where I used it before. Because case is sometimes called switch. So if you switch to JavaScript, or I can never remember is Ruby using case or switch, so it's like, I'll just look it up. Ruby else if. I can also never remember, so Ruby spells it else if. Oh.
It's not the E and it's too many.
Yes. For some bizarre reason, every programming language spells else if differently. So sometimes it's else if, and sometimes it's else space if. I don't know why. They don't pick any consistent thing. Usually the way to figure it out is you type in one and then it explodes and then you type in the other one. Ruby is else if without an E. No idea why. They just picked that. So again, these are things not really worth memorizing, but just like keep an example or two somewhere and then they go, oh yeah, how did I make it work last time? Oh, minor thing with ifs. You can put brackets around the thing, the check, because if it's really complicated, like and you have this big huge thing, or you can do like, oops, and x less than 5, oops. So if you have some like, oh, so this is an or, and this is an and. So you can get pretty insanely complicated with these, like if the first tweet has the word toast in it and it's a Tuesday and the current user hasn't got a profile picture, blah 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 blah. Admittedly, out of code readability, you usually want to like tidy it up a bit. Because like this already looks crazy. Is it like, if it's Monday and it's red, will that work? Or will it, because I think this one will, I think this, like, yeah, it becomes that maths thing of like, if the color is red but it's not less than 5, which one is which? So you want to write it in a more readable way than this.
Is it like in which order? Is it like always just from left to right? Like let's say in this case.
It follows the same thing as regular maths. Wait, what happens? So this one, I think it will try to do.
Let's say only like x is 6 and we have a different color and it's Tuesday, then will it be false?
Actually, that's usually the time to put in more brackets. So I think in this case, it will check this whole thing, and then it will check this whole thing. So these both have to be true, or just this has to be true.
Okay. So like always just add an extra bracket usually.
Yeah, to be honest, I would quite often split it onto like extra lines of like thing A equals this thing. So that's what I was saying, like if it gets more complicated, you need to like, because we could spend half an hour trying to figure out like if, like what the, like if it's X and then Y, will it be blah. Whereas if I split it onto like, if I split it onto multiple lines, now it's a bit easier to read. Because now it's like, is this true or is this true? And it's a bit better. It needs a better name than thing A and thing B. It would be like
Yeah.
user profile picture. So in general, you don't want these to be too complicated, just because if it's difficult for you that wrote it to understand it, when you give it to someone else, they're going to look at it and go, what the hell, I don't understand. Or, well, mostly they're going to think, well, they'll figure it out and then hate you forever, is usually what happens. Okay. And okay, let's get rid of all this. So, trick question time. So, what is this line doing? This is going to go somewhere. So, what happens on this line? So it's setting the value of x equal to 1. And what is this line doing? Oh, yes. Have you guys seen this before? This is the comparison. So 1 equals is setting the value, and 2 equals is like, are these the same? So what is line 2 doing?
Evaluating if it's true or not.
Okay, so it's going to give back true or false. Now for the trick question.
Wait, what did you say the difference was? X equals 1, so you're setting the...
Yep. So it's setting it
Yeah?
with
Sorry, yeah.
yeah, which is technically incorrect. Mathematicians hate this because in maths the equals is the comparison operator.
Yeah, definitely.
Like you can't have like 2 equals 1 in maths is incorrect because they're not equivalent. Okay, but so this is like checking, are they the same? So I'll come back to this in a second. Ignore this thing at the bottom. I'll come back to it. Okay.
Could you do 1 equals 2, and then just say false?
It'll
What happens?
probably go nuts. Actually, no, yeah, it'll be false. No, you're right. Sorry, I got confused. If I
So
try
I'm
and...
doing it in Ruby, but my internet was really bad, so I couldn't really... It kept on falling out, and I didn't really understand. It said it was wrong, but it was... I don't know. No,
Not
sorry.
sure. If I try and do... So if I try and do 1 equals 2, it comes out with false. If I try and do 1 equals 2, it goes... blah, can't. Or syntax error, basically. Yeah, sometimes this is like the syntax error is a bit hard to read. Because quite often it'll just say, hey, I got an unexpected thing. But then you have to go back and look through your code and go like, why is it not expecting it? Like if I do something weird, like a plus, it'll go, why is there a plus there? And I kind of have to look at like, oh, does this make sense? Okay, maybe it doesn't. But sometimes it's like somewhere in the 20 lines of stuff, you have to find the one line that doesn't make sense. Okay, but, so, what does this line of code do? Oh, actually I'll put this up here. Okay, no, wait. Okay, so if I set x equal to 5, no wait, hold on. Okay, will it print yes or no? So x is equal to 5, and it's saying if x is equal 1, will that be true or false? Yep, it'll put no, because it's going to say, is x the same as 1? No, it's not. And so the reason I'm showing this is a mistake that comes up sometimes. What happens if I do this? Dun dun dun. It's
Well, I think it will do the same, because wouldn't it see it,
it will
or it will make an error.
instead of comparing them, it will set the value and then give back true.
Because nothing broke.
Yep. And this is
Okay, it will like override the value.
yep, which is quite often very, very bad. So it's more just something to watch out for if you're ever doing this. Because obviously that's bad if you're saying like, I don't know, if user permissions equals admin, let them delete stuff, else don't, but then you've just accidentally set them to be an admin. instead of checking it, now they're an admin. It doesn't come up very often, but when it does come up, it
tells you actually.
oh, does it? That is actually good.
It tells you should have double equals.
Ah, that is awesome and new. Cool. No, it's saying it's a warning. So it's still allowing it to happen, but it's printing out a warning saying, hey, this is probably not a good idea. That's a good point. So there's errors, which is saying like, no, I quit, this doesn't work. And there's warnings, which are saying like,
I'll help you
Is-
now, or is that like?
it's usually the person that wrote, up to the person that wrote the warning. So for example, this one is them just saying, this is maybe not a good idea. Somewhere, do I still have the Twitter thing? Like when I load Twitter, I get this warning about like already initialized OpenSSL, blah. I've never figured out what it means. It's never caused any problems. So some of the warnings you can just totally ignore.
Where would they be off with it when it's not like on IRB?
To somewhere, it depends. If you've got a full like Rails app, like serious production, tens of thousands of users, you'll usually have like a dedicated logging system that it all goes somewhere. So it really varies. Like it can be just on the screen, or it can be this crazy custom thing.
Like out of the box, it wouldn't show at all?
It's kind of fuzzy. It depends what you're doing. I think it'll emerge naturally. Like with Ruby on Rails, you have the server, like you have the website, like you click in the browser over here, and on the terminal you'll have the errors printed out. I think we'll come back to it. It'll kind of answer itself of its own accord. Or the answer is it depends, which is not a helpful answer. Okay, so that's a common thing with ifs that can go wrong. Minor thing that I just want to mention, the not equals is just exclamation mark equals. So if you just want to do like if name is not, if the user is not an admin, print out you don't have permission or whatever. I think it's on that cheat sheet somewhere. Yep. There's a few other crazy ones. You can do less than, equals than. You can do a bunch of like the mathsy ones if you really wanted. Actually, the cheat sheet's worth like just kind of scrolling through just to see some of the stuff you can do. Just things like if I have an array and I want to delete a specific thing, how do I do it?
Is it online already? I think put it on.
It should, if everything worked, it should be online and you should be able to see it. It's called.
Go on Drive and then for this course a folder and
Yep.
In the Google.
And
like in the spring course folder. I don't know if we see this one, but like within the spring course folder we see.
yep.
There it is.
Yeah, there should be 3 for week 1. There's notes and exercises. No, week 1, day 1 on Twitter examples is the exercises for later on. And week 1 Ruby notes is kind of a bit of a summary of what I'm talking about. And is that everything? Okay, so I'll show one last thing and then take a break. Okay, where am I? Okay, so someone was asking about doing when to use IRB and when to use a file. So you guys don't have to follow this, I'm just going to do it straight here. If I can find the right place. Okay, so we were doing an IRB, which runs it immediately and also forgets it immediately. Well, not immediately, but when you close IRB, it's gone. So it's useful for things when you're like kind of improvised, or you're just testing something new, or you're kind of exploring something, but that you don't need to keep it around. The alternative is to do it in a text file. So I can do equals 1. So I'm just going to fill a file with random code. So it's just called test.rb. It's the same Ruby code, and I can run ruby test.rb. It's going to ask me for stuff, and it runs hello Edward, your number is 1. So it just ran the code that was in the file. When it's finished, once it gets to the end, it kills it and goes back to the terminal. So that's the other option, to put it into a file, which obviously if you're doing like a serious project is usually how you'll do it. So like a website is something you want to run forever, so IRB wouldn't really work. You could theoretically do it in IRB, but obviously as soon as you close it, the website is gone. So it's not much point. I did mention it ends the file. Let's see. Wait, hold on. So the file can run forever if the code runs forever. Oops. So this is just going to be a loop that will like go over and over and over and over again, and every time it will wait 1 second. So it's more like, or the point is just if you have something like a website, it's not that it runs and then stops. Like the previous program, when it finished, it stopped and killed itself, whereas this will just run forever and ever and ever. Which is more like the style of a website, that it will just sit and wait for people to ask for the page. But to be honest, that kind of happens organically anyway. But yeah, for the most part, you'll write your Ruby code in Ruby files. I'm not even sure they need to be called .rb, but it's a good idea. Last thing before break, these are comments. If you want something to not be run, you just put a comment before it. That's about it. Okay, so let's take a break.